What's this strange white thing on a cow? Why does Vladimir Putin walk so weird? And what's that? These are important weird facts you should know. Let's start with the cow hole. This is a cannulated cow, a cow that has been surgically fitted with a cannula, basically a rubber porthole. It allows vets to access the cow's digestive system from the cow's side for research purposes. They take samples of their digestion for forage analysis, which means that vets can see which foods are providing the best nutrient value for the cow, allowing them to create nutritional recommendations that can benefit livestock farmers worldwide. For example, multiple studies have described how specific foods convert into greater quality and quantity of milk and meat production. Other studies noted how varying cow diets can reduce methane output, reducing climate change. They can also use samples from the cow to repopulate a sick cow's stomach with healthy microbiota. This process is called transfaunation or microbiota transplant. Whilst it may look strange, the practice has actually been going on since the 1920s. The device is fitted with local anesthetic with the edges of the skin stitched together to prevent infection. Still, it's getting less common nowadays due to ethical considerations, and there are now plastic laboratory models of the cow's stomach to do this instead of having to reach inside a cow for a sample. Now, have you ever wondered why Putin walks so weird? Most people walk with their arms swinging in coordination with the opposite leg, but Putin's stride is different. When he walks, his left arm moves forward with his right leg, while his right arm remains almost motionless and close to his body. This unusual movement has prompted some to consider neurological conditions such as Parkinson's disease as possible causes. However, Putin shows no signs of weakness or tremors in his arm, and he has maintained this walking pattern for years, which dismisses those theories. In 2015, a group of doctors led by Dr. Bastian Blum published a paper offering another possible explanation. Putin's gait could be a result of his time in the KGB. The KGB training manual instructs agents to keep their weapon close to their chest, holding one arm stationary by the side as if gripping a weapon. The doctor suggests that Putin's gunslinger's gait might be a long-standing habit formed during his KGB years, a stance he continues to use in public. They further support this idea by pointing out that other former KGB and military officials such as Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev and former defense ministers also exhibit similar walking patterns. While this theory remains speculative, the repetition of this gait among ex-KGB members and the absence of other medical signs make it a convincing explanation for Putin's distinctive walk. Now, ever wondered what this little dangly thing at the back of your throat is? It might look like a miniature punching bag, but believe it or not, that tiny structure called the uvula actually serves several important functions. First off, when you swallow food, it prevents food from going up your nose. Pretty handy, right? Without it, things might get a little messy. But that's not all. It's also constantly producing saliva, which helps keep your throat moist and aids in swallowing. That's a pretty vital role in making sure everything goes down smoothly. The cool part is you're unconsciously controlling the uvula all the time. There's a tiny muscle inside the uvula which allows it to move around, playing a big role in helping you speak clearly. So next time you stare at it in the mirror with your mouth open, know it's not just hanging there for show. It's working hard to keep you from choking, help you speak, and keep your throat in tip-top shape. Those facts were bizarre, but not as strange as the origins of bubble wrap, how mistletoe is actually poop, or how many spiders you eat in your sleep. These facts are coming up with each one weirder than the last. Starting with, whenever I see a spider in my home, I immediately drop what I'm doing, put it under a glass, and throw it safely outside, before dry heaving into paper bags for 10 minutes. Still, as horrifying as it may be to touch one, the idea of swallowing one is even worse. After all, it's common knowledge that humans swallow between 4 and 8 spiders a year in their sleep, or is it just 20 in their lifetime? Whatever version of this myth you've heard, that makes for a lot of spider snacks. Working with 8 annually, that would mean the roughly 8 billion people on Earth swallow 64 billion spiders a year. While seeing all those creepy crawlies in the same bedroom would be nightmarish, that yearly loss would hardly impact their numbers, as there are estimated to be quadrillions of spiders on Earth. Never fear though, this myth is still baloney. For starters, for it to be true, the world would need to have a fairly even distribution of spiders, which just isn't the case. Secondly, spiders feed in one of 2 ways: by building webs to catch prey or by actively hunting. A human's mouth is too small and difficult to build a web in, and unless there are flies in your mouth, it's bad for hunting too. Most spiders have tiny hairs on their legs, making them extremely sensitive to movement, which makes a breathing mouth unpleasant to them. Not to mention all that saliva. This all combines to make a mouth a very unappealing place for a spider, despite what Billie Eilish might have you believe. This myth was first mentioned in a folklore book back in 1954, but only spread when a journalist named Lisa Holst heard about it in 1993. She used it as an example of a clearly false urban legend that could easily spread via email, and lo and behold, she was correct. Her own example of easily spreadable misinformation ended up getting easily spread around. Oh, the irony. Well, at least she proved her theory had legs. Being an astronaut comes with its own set of unique challenges, but something you might not have thought about is how to scratch an annoying itch when you're covered head to toe in bulky spacesuit. Surprisingly, astronauts do have a few options when it comes to nose scratching. In fact, most space helmets have a small patch of Velcro on the inside for this very purpose. Besides this, the helmets also are fitted with a foam block known as a Valsalva device, which astronauts use to block their noses with when they readjust pressure. This block can also come in handy as an improvised scratching post in times of need. In 2011, Endeavour shuttle astronaut Andrew Fustel found himself in a rather sticky situation when some of the chemical used to prevent fogging inside the helmet got in his eye. Thankfully, he was able to use the Valsalva device to relieve the irritation and continue his spacewalk. Next time you have an annoying itch, just think, it could be worse. We seldom pass a fountain without stopping to toss in some loose change in exchange for a wish from the powers that be. But where does it actually go? All those pennies can't just sit there forever, or they'd pile up and clog the fountain's works. Depending on where a fountain is and who owns it, there are actually a number of places the collected coins could end up. In New York City, loose change collected from fountains in public parks usually goes towards the fountain's upkeep. But park staff aren't always the first ones to get their hands on them. An article published by The Atlantic in 2016 found that most of the city's fountains are stripped of their coins by entrepreneurial New Yorkers. Rome's iconic Trevi Fountain, where visitors have tossed coins for hundreds of years, is cleaned every night, reportedly netting as much as $4,000 a day in loose change. The money is then donated to a nearby grocery store for the disadvantaged, and officials are notoriously tough on anyone caught pinching from it. Minnesota's Mall of America also collects about $24,000 a year from its fountains and ponds, and nonprofits can submit applications for a cut of the change. Basically, your unfulfilled wish goes towards a good cause, most of the time. We all know that it was one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind when Neil Armstrong first stepped foot on the moon back in 1969. But while humanity was busy proving its space-age prowess, people back on Earth were still carrying their luggage around by handles like Neanderthals. It wasn't until 3 years later in 1972 that someone thought to put wheels on suitcases, and the very first patent for wheeled luggage was filed. Good to see humanity has its priorities in the right order. As unbelievable as it sounds, there's a good reason it was done this way round. The space race of the 1960s forced a lot of innovation in the space industry, while long-haul travel wasn't as common back then. Still, I find it pretty astonishing that man went to the moon before he thought to put tiny wheels on suitcases. Kissing under the mistletoe is just one of those weird Christmas traditions that has stuck over time. But have you ever stopped to wonder why we do it in the first place, or how the plant itself got such an odd name? Well, I'm sorry to burst your love bubble, but mistletoe is not nearly as romantic as you once thought. The name derives the fact that mistletoe tends to spring from bird droppings that have fallen on trees. After the missile thrush birds eat the berries, digest the seeds, and then poop them out, new plants grow. Thus, the plant was given the Old English name mistletoe from mistle, which literally means dung, and tan, the plural of ta, which means twig. In other words, mistletoe can be translated as dung twig. And that's not all. Most varieties of mistletoe are considered parasites. That basically means that they can't sustain themselves on their own photosynthesis. Instead, they leach what they need from whatever tree they happen to be living on, which sounds very similar in nature to many of the couples who end up kissing under it at Christmas time. Some varieties, like the North American Arcithobium pusillum, are full-scale parasites because they get all their resources from the tree they are growing on and have no leaves of their own. So next time you try and score a cheeky peck under the mistletoe, just remember that you're cozying up under a parasitic poop twig. There have been plenty of bizarre failed inventions throughout the years, but none are quite as absurd as the infamous Katzenclavier, or cat organ. To imagine what it looked like, picture 10 cats all lined up in boxes with their tails held taut and secured underneath a keyboard. Each time a key is pressed, it hits the tail of the corresponding cat or, in the worst case, pricks it with a pen, causing the cat to produce a loud mewing sound. Of course, the cats were arranged according to pitch of their meows. The first mention of this sadistic instrument dates back to the early 16th century when this drawing appeared in a book by John Theodore Bry from 1596. The weirdest thing about this horrifying invention is that it generated enormous excitement in therapeutic circles. Legend has it an Italian prince was suddenly cured of his psychopathy upon seeing an image of these musical cats. Meanwhile, medical theoretician Johann Christian Ryle cited the cat piano as a treatment for mental illnesses like schizophrenia. It's unclear exactly how it did this, but it's safe to assume that the cat piano was the only thing crazy enough to grab the attention of crazy people. Luckily for the cats, there's no evidence anyone actually ever made one of these. Even the smartest brains might have trouble imagining why the state of Arizona prohibits donkeys from sleeping in bathtubs. After all, what could be criminal about a classic farmyard animal getting 40 winks? The story goes that in 1924, a dam near the city of Kingman collapsed, causing a flash flood that floated a donkey in a bathtub a mile into the valley. It soon transpired that the donkey had climbed into a tub that was abandoned outside its owner's property and settled down for a nap before the unexpected turn of events caused it to become stranded. The townspeople went to such a great expense to rescue the donkey from the bathtub that they lobbied for a law to prevent such an exhausting event from ever happening again. From that point on, it was decreed that although they may stand and be bathed, the donkey must never ever sleep in a bathtub. Presumably, the donkey had no say in the matter. There is nothing on earth more satisfying than popping bubble wrap. But as fun as the protective stuff is to pop, it wasn't originally destined to be a prominent packing material. Back in 1957, investors Alfred Fielding and Mark Chivans were trying to create a new kind of textured wallpaper that was all the rage at the time. Initially, they put 2 pieces of plastic shower curtain through a heat sealing machine, but they were left disappointed by the final flimsy sheet of film dotted with trapped air bubbles. They were under no illusion that anyone would want to paste this on their wall, so they patented the process and began thinking of other uses for their invention. They improved its design and remarketed it as greenhouse insulation, though it didn't make waves in that market either. After that, they finally discovered bubble wrap's true calling in the protective packaging industry. These days, around 240,000 miles of bubble wrap is made and used every single year. That's enough to loop around the Earth 10 times over. Pretty incredible to think this idea was once destined to become the world's ugliest wallpaper. If you're someone whose name can be pronounced a number of different ways, you'll know just how annoying it can be when people constantly get it wrong. But making a real-life law to govern the pronunciation? That might be pushing it slightly. Well, that's pretty much what happened in the state of Arkansas. That's right, according to Title I, Chapter 4, Section 104 of the Arkansas Code, there's only one right way to pronounce the state name, and that's Arkansas, not Arkansas. Or Arkansas. Those would be both considered illegal. According to the rule, the correct pronunciation of Arkansas, with the final S being silent, was made official by an act of state legislature in 1881, although it's unclear what the punishment is for getting it wrong, if there even is one. And if you thought that law was dumb, oh boy. In May 2020, Florida biologist Natalie Clonch discovered an unusual-looking curly-tailed lizard near a pizza parlor in Cocoa Beach that made her stop dead in her tracks. At first, it seemed the pear-shaped critter had a belly packed full of eggs, but that wasn't exactly the case. According to Clonch, eggs feel like jelly beans, but this felt like a semi-solid putty-like mass. X-ray scans revealed that the lizard was actually packed completely full of something else. Poop! As the lizard gulped down insects and other small reptiles, it had also swallowed particles of grease-soaked sand which stuck together to form a lump that was far too dense to be excreted. The more it ate, the bigger the mass grew, and by the time Clonch arrived, the lizard was so constipated that it had to be humanely euthanized. The female lizard weighed about 1 ounce, and the mass alone weighed about 0.8 ounces, or about 78.5% of its total body weight. According to Clonch, this represents the largest feces-to-body mass ratio ever recorded in a living animal. Dissection also revealed that the lizard's internal organs were so squeezed that they'd basically vanished altogether. Next time you feel full after Thanksgiving, spare a thought for this poor lizard. According to author Alan Metcalf, OK is the most frequently spoken word in the world. But what does it actually stand for? Historically speaking, OK is an abbreviation for the phrase all correct. But how could that be when there's not even a K in sight? Well, it turns out millennials aren't the only ones who like to butcher words for the fun of it. That trend actually started back in the 19th century. The word first appeared in a Boston newspaper in 1839 when an editor, clearly trying to get down with the kids,
"How do you do, fellow kids?"
decided that the new hip way to spell all correct was all correct with a K. This was apparently pretty frequent at the time, with no-go becoming no-go as in K-N-O-W, and all right becoming all W-R-I-T-E. But how did OK survive for nearly 200 years? During the 1840 election campaign of America's 8th president, Martin Van Buren, supporters formed a club that was affectionately named after his nickname, Old Kinderhook. They called themselves the OK Club, and the phrase was so inescapable that it stuck forever. Did you know that Frankenstein refers not to the monster, but the name of the monster's creator? You did? Well, la-dee-da. Check out the big brain on this nerd. Since Mary Shelley's seminal work of early science fiction was released in 1818, the novel has been adapted and reinterpreted in dozens of different mediums, including movies, stage plays, and even video games. And while each of these adaptations is unique in their own way, something they all get wrong is the monster. Ask just about anyone to picture Frankenstein's monster, and they'll likely imagine a hulking, mumbling, 8-foot-tall brute with bolts in his neck. In the book, however, the monster couldn't be more different. He's talkative, introspective, philosophical, and a good deal of the book is even narrated from his perspective. Rather than getting mad and smashing everything in sight, the monster spends most of the book feeling lonely and begging his creator for a companion. As for his appearance, the monster is described as tall, muscular, with lustrous flowing hair and pearly white teeth. Damn girl. Okay, so he's also described as having thin, dark lips and yellow pallid skin, but at worst that makes him a hot goth boy. So where did the modern monstrous Frankenstein come from? Well, the monster exploded into the popular consciousness after the 1931 film, which set the standard for depictions of the monster. However, this movie wasn't an adaptation of the book, it was a film version of Peggy Webbing's 1927 theater adaptation. Peggy must have hated hot goth boys because in her play the monster was just that, a monster. Maybe it's time for a Twilight-style sexy Frankenstein revival. I think Dark Frank is a good name. It's no secret that some people prefer to be alone, but one woman enjoys her own company so much that she is literally the only resident in her town of Monowai in Nebraska. 89-year-old Elsie Eller is currently employed as the town's mayor, librarian, bartender, secretary, clerk, and tavern owner. At 9 a.m. every morning, apart from Mondays, Eiler opens Monowai Tavern, where she serves burgers at $3.50 a pop, hot dogs at $1.25, and beers, which are hilariously pegged as the coldest beer in town. You might think she'd have no customers, but Eiler has already welcomed visitors from 47 states and 41 countries, and the tavern acts as a hangout for residents of the neighboring towns. Back in the 1930s, Monowai was a bustling railroad town, but people gradually started moving away, and when Eiler's husband Rudy died in 2004, she became the only remaining resident. Eiler jokes that one of the main perks of living in a one-person town is that she always wins the vote for mayor by a landslide victory. But there are a couple of drawbacks, too. She collects $500 in taxes from herself to keep the town's 3 lampposts lit and water running. Ever fancied a vacation to Antarctica? Many of the cafes, bars, and shops dotted around the continent are cash only. But what happens when you're all out? Are fish considered a currency? Sadly not, but thankfully you can just visit one of the 2 ATM machines. In 1998, banking conglomerate Wells Fargo installed Antarctica's very first cash point at McMurdo Station, the largest science hub on the continent. Depending on the season, McMurdo's population ranges from 250 to 1,000 people, so carrying cash is a must. Part of the reason the second ATM was later added to the area is that if one machine goes down at a time when repair flights to Antarctica are scarce, the second machine can be cannibalized for parts instead. Despite McMurdo actually being closer to New Zealand, the machines dispose American dollars because Antarctica doesn't have an official currency. Although you can purchase a pretty neat commemorative Antarctic $10 just to prove that you've been there. Just what the heck is that tiny pocket for on your jeans? Historically speaking, this seemingly useless addition to one of the world's most popular clothing items was known as a watch pocket. This came about in the 1800s when cowboys used to wear their pocket watches on chains in their waistcoats, until Levi's introduced the small rectangular pocket which would keep watches from getting broken. As times changed, the pocket adopted various other names, each describing a new use, including ticket pocket, coin pocket, and even condom pocket. Nowadays, it's too small to hold anything useful, but it remains as a staple of iconic fashion history. Speaking of fashion icons, high heels and stilettos might be considered a feminine accessory, but once upon a time this wasn't the case. Back in the 10th century, men in horseback riding cultures in Europe wore heeled shoes which would make it easier for them to stay in their stirrups. The Persian cavalry adopted inch-high heels like these, and the trend then spread to Europe as a signifier that someone owned horses and was therefore wealthy. Eventually, upper-class women also began wearing heels to assert their equality, and the shoes became a standard form of dress for the wealthier members of society throughout the 17th century. By the turn of the 19th century, men had renounced the high-heeled shoe as highly impractical, but women's heels had already become more decorative and fashionable, so the custom continued. Picture this: you've just gotten married. It's the happiest day of your life. Until in the middle of cutting the cake, a pigeon explodes all over your pristine tux or dress or bathrobe. Look, it's your wedding, wear whatever you want. The point is, a pigeon explodes and ruins the whole thing. The myth is that hungry pigeons chow down on dry rice, which is traditionally thrown at weddings. After the bird drinks some water, the rice begins to expand in its stomach until, boom, the poor pigeon bursts right in the middle of the best man's speech. Unsurprisingly, this urban legend is completely untrue. Birds don't explode if they eat rice. In fact, they don't even get sick. The digestive acids inside a creature's stomach, even a pigeon's, break down rice far too quickly for them to absorb any other liquids. Plus, even if it could stick around in the stomach long enough to significantly absorb liquid, rice actually expands in size less than birdseed does. And we don't see many birds exploding after eating from bird feeders now, do we? Some believe this myth was started by grumpy church practitioners after one too many people slipped on rice at weddings. However, this reasonable-sounding explanation is also a myth. In reality, we can thank one person for its spread, former Connecticut State Representative Mae S. Schmidl. In 1985, she tried to introduce a bill that would fine citizens $50 for throwing rice at weddings. People told her it was bunk at the time, and despite the bill not passing, the publicity was enough to give the rumor feet, or should I say, wings. So next time you're at a wedding, feel free to fling that rice right into the bride's eyes. Being a part of the royal family comes with its own perks, and if you happen to be the King of England, one of these is the immediate ownership of every unclaimed swan in the country. This bizarre custom goes right back to medieval times when the majestic creatures were considered a delicacy only bona fide blue bloods could expect to dine out on. The only other people allowed to hunt and eat unmarked swans are the Fellows of St. John's College in Cambridge. Fortunately for the swans, though, there's no record of anyone at the college tucking in to roast swan since 1896. Still, the king's monopoly over the winged creatures reigns on. During the third week of July each year, there's even a centuries-old ceremony called a swan-upping, which involves having people count and mark every swan in the River Thames while a member of the royal family watches. Shark-infested waters might be the stuff of nightmares, but the reality is that your chances of ever ending up in such a perilous situation are actually pretty slim. What you should really be worried about is a far more silent killer that could strike whenever you feel a hunger coming on: the humble vending machine. That's right, between 4 to 6 times more people are killed in the US each year as a result of vending machine-related incidents than bona fide shark attacks. In fact, each year, there are over 1,700 reports of freak snack machine injuries compared to some 25 shark attacks, and while 2 to 4 people generally lose their lives at the hands, or should I say shelves, of the vending machine, less than 1 is killed by a shark. Of course, vending machines aren't armed with terrifying jaws, but a surprising amount of people find themselves crushed under the weight of the machines after shaking them too hard. Flaming hot Cheetos are never worth dying for, guys. It's all relative, though. After all, a great white shark is 10 times more deadly than a vending machine, but you're far less likely to encounter one on the street. The draped torch-holding Columbia Pictures lady has graced the silver screen ever since the company was first founded in 1924. Millions of moviegoers would recognize her face, but could anyone tell you who she actually is? For decades, the true identity of this iconic staple of movie history remained a mystery until New Orleans artist Michael Dais, who was commissioned to update the logo in July 1991, revealed all. Dais had planned to make a painting for the new face of Columbia and asked his friend Kathy Anderson to help him shoot some reference shots at her apartment. On a whim, Dais asked Kathy's co-worker, then 31-year-old graphic designer Jenny Joseph, to model for the shoot on her lunch break. They took several shots in the makeshift studio using a bedsheet and a desk lamp, and Dais then spent 2 months painting his masterpiece of Jenny. The rest, as they say, is history. Jenny Joseph hadn't modeled before she became the Columbia Pictures lady, and she never modeled again, making this one iconic mic drop moment. It's a pretty undisputed fact that DreamWorks is yet to top the cult classic that is 2001 Shrek, but there was a time when the boisterous green ogre was going to be very different. Instead of ranting about onions in a thick Scottish accent, audiences would probably have watched their favorite sarcastic ogre guzzling maple syrup by the gallon and wooing Princess Fiona with his hockey skills. That's right, Mike Myers has since revealed that he originally recorded the voice of Shrek in to sound like himself, but with a thicker Canadian twang, until he finally saw a rough cut in February 2000 and had a sudden epiphany. Instead of sounding scary and imposing, Myers realized that Shrek's voice needed to show some vulnerability, so he decided to challenge himself with a Scottish accent instead. It may have been a stroke of genius from Myers, but it was a total nightmare for DreamWorks executive Jeffrey Katzenberg, who said that 1/3 of the scenes involving Shrek had already been animated. In the end, Katzenberg reluctantly allowed Myers to re-record his lines, a massive risk that cost about $4 million, or about 10% of the movie's production budget, according to Katzenberg. It all paid off in the end, though. The movie was a hit with movie critics and cinema audiences alike, and we can't imagine Shrek any other way. When was the last time you traveled on an escalator? You probably don't remember. After all, who makes a mental note of that kind of thing? For the people of Wyoming, taking an escalator probably seems like a rare treat because there's only 2 in the entire state. At 0.0000034 escalators per capita, according to 2024 population numbers of 585,501. Both escalators are located in the city of Casper, at the First National Bank and the Hilltop National Bank. Anywhere else, and you'll just have to take the stairs. Why is there such a glaring lack of modern transportation in the cowboy state, you ask? Perhaps superstitions about being suddenly sucked into the teeth at the end of the moving staircase run rampant. Apparently, there's no such conspiracy about the contraptions. It just turns out elevators are easier and cheaper to install. The neighboring state of Dakota and Montana also only have about 6 escalators each, so maybe there's just a whole who needs moving stairs vibe going on in the Midwest. As if coexisting with a population of around 1,000 polar bears wasn't enough, the 2,000 residents of the remote Norwegian town of Longyearbyen must follow one extremely strange rule. They can't die there.
You're under arrest.
Located about halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole, Longyearbyen is about as cold as it gets, and therein lies the problem. You see, back in 1950, locals made a rather disturbing discovery. Bodies that had been buried in the freezing ground were being preserved rather than decomposing naturally. Things became even more worrying when scientists dug up a living sample of the 1918 Spanish flu from one of those long-dead residents in 1998. Locals were so afraid of disease spreading from preserved remains that a law was passed to prohibit anyone else from being buried in the local churchyard. That means anyone nearing the end of their lives now has to fly to the Norwegian mainland before drawing their last breath. Talk about dying in peace. Nothing gives me the willies quite like Disney adults. But even I've always wondered, why does Mickey Mouse, the very face of the company, only have 4 fingers? Perhaps you've never considered this to be unusual, or maybe you just think it would be strange for a mouse to have 5 digits. If that's the case, you'd be half right. Walt Disney himself even said that 5 fingers would look like a bunch of bananas. Mickey isn't the only one though. Just take a look at SpongeBob, The Simpsons, The Flintstones, the Looney Tunes, or pretty much any other well-loved cartoon character. Notice the theme? As with most things, it all comes down to 2 precious commodities: time and money. You see, early animation required thousands of hand-drawn frames, and believe it or not, adding 1 extra digit per frame would require more of the animator's time and therefore more money from the companies. What's more, having 4 fingers is a happy medium between 3, which looks a little alien, and 5, which seems all too human. Either way, I bet you'll never stop noticing it now. Mickey's home, Disney World, might be the most magical place on Earth, and part of that magic is that you're unlikely to leave the park with a single mosquito bite, because there aren't any mosquitoes there. Disney World is located slap bang in the middle of swampy Florida, so it should be teeming with flying insects. But there's a smooth undercover operation called the Mosquito Surveillance Program in place to keep them at bay. Firstly, there are carbon dioxide traps all over the park. These lure mosquitoes in by imitating human breath, then, once they catch the bugs, the team can quickly analyze how best to eradicate the population. Disney has another secret weapon though, an army of sentinel chickens. While the birds go about their daily lives in coops all over Disney World, their blood is constantly monitored for mosquito-borne diseases like West Nile virus. Although the chickens can't actually get sick, the Disney team can use them to locate the offending insects and deliver a swift blow to wipe them out. Some animals have perfected the art of playing dead to protect themselves from greedy predators, but what happens when method acting goes too far? Well, in the case of one very unfortunate snail, you could end up being scooped up and stuck to a museum card for the next 5 years. That's right, way back in 1846, authorities at the British Museum glued what they thought was a deceased snail to a piece of cardboard for a display. The snail in question, formerly known as the species Helix desertorum, had been collected by Charles Lamb Esquire, who found it in the Egyptian desert in March of 1846 before donating it to the museum. Assuming the snail had simply expired in transit, recipients glued it to a cardboard show card. For 5 long years, no one knew that the British Museum's catatonic snail had simply retreated into its shell in a deep sleep. Until one day when curators noticed something strange while cleaning the exhibit. The snail's shell seemed to have moved slightly and a suspicious trail of iridescent slime followed it. They removed the specimen from the card and decided to bathe it, and within minutes the snail reacted to the moisture and poked its head out to survey its new surroundings. You might imagine that waking up in a British museum after 5 years of undisturbed sleep would be quite a shock to the system, but the snail didn't seem to care much. After being fed some cabbage, it fell asleep for another 2 years. What a legend. Ever wondered why pill bottles have protective foil seals beneath the lid? You might assume it's there to keep the pills airtight, but the real reason is far more morbid. On September 29, 1982, Mary Kellerman took a Tylenol for a cold. A few hours later, she was dead. That same day, Adam Janus died in exactly the same circumstances. When his brother and sister-in-law visited and developed headaches, they took Tylenol from the same bottle and both perished within the next 2 days. In the days that followed, 3 more people suffered from the same mysterious fate. By early October, investigators discovered that the pills the victims took were laced with cyanide. Over 31 million bottles of Tylenol were recalled and a couple more deadly bottles were found on shelves in the Chicago area. One had taken the bottles off the shelves, put cyanide into the pill capsules, and then placed them back. The criminal was never caught, but the following year, U.S. Congress published the Tylenol bill, making it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. And in 1989, the FDA established federal guidelines for manufacturers to make all such products tamper-proof, which included protective foil seals. If you're a Westerner, odds are when you think of Buddha, you imagine a jolly laughing man made from solid gold. And while being a jolly laughing man made from solid gold is by no means a bad thing, it also isn't what Buddha looks like. Seriously, this isn't Buddha. Don't feel bad for not knowing that, though. Even Google gets it wrong if you search for any variant of smiling Buddha or laughing Buddha. So who is this guy? Well, Buddhism is an old and complex religion, so to briefly summarize, his name is Budai, and he's from the future. Kind of. Budai was a 10th century Chinese monk who was known for traveling from town to town and giving out supplies and presents to children and the needy. A bit like Santa Claus, except he beat Santa to the punch by 1,000 years. On Budai's deathbed, he revealed he was actually an incarnation of Maitreya. Maitreya isn't our world's Buddha, but the next world's Buddha. Buddhists believe that when what we understand to be this world ends, a new one will begin. In this new world, Maitreya will emerge to enlighten its denizens as their Buddha. So you can think of Budai as an enlightened one from the next world who briefly stopped by this one to see what all the fuss was about. Remember that the Buddha of Buddhism is not actually a god in the traditional sense. He was just a guy named Siddhartha Gautama who achieved enlightenment and decided to teach his learnings to the world. Man, I haven't felt this enlightened since I learned Robin isn't the son of Batman. These days, online dating is the most popular choice when it comes to meeting new people, but back in the infancy of the internet, it was entirely new territory. In 1993, a man named Gary Kremen saw World Wide Web's potential as the perfect way to put romantic strangers in touch with each other. So he created a little domain called Match.com. Nowadays, it's one of the world's biggest online dating sites with some 5.8 million active users worldwide, but people didn't quite take to it immediately. The internet was still pretty fresh, and meeting strangers through it seemed like a daunting prospect. Undeterred by the lack of interest, Kremen devised a clever plan. He'd make everyone at the company create a profile on the site, which included his girlfriend at the time. You see where this is going, don't you? His idea worked too well because Kremen's girlfriend soon met someone new on the site and decided to leave him. It might seem like Kremen had just taken a massive L, but he apparently saw it as a positive thing because it proved that Match.com could be a success. Keep telling yourself that, buddy. Road signs are well established nowadays, but once upon a time, the iconic bright red stop sign was yellow instead. The story goes that in 1922, the American Association of State Highway Officials met to determine a standard design and settled on yellow as their second choice. By this time, red was already used on traffic lights, partly because the color had historically signified danger, but also because it is scientifically classed as the color with the longest wavelength. The cone-shaped cells in our eyes are tuned to detect different wavelengths on the visible light spectrum from 380 to 700 nanometers away, and as red falls right around 700, it is the color that can be seen from furthest away. Sadly, there was no red dye in 1922 that wouldn't eventually fade, so they settled on yellow, which was the second longest wavelength, until fade-resistant red porcelain enamel became available in 1954. And on that note, I'm just about finished with crazy facts for one day. Did you learn something new? If you did, let me know down in those comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.